What if everything you thought you knew about Brooklyn Beckham's marriage was wrong? What if the fairy tale romance wasn't built on love, but on control, pressure, and silent judgment? Because tonight, insiders are whispering something explosive, something that changes this entire story. Behind the smiles, behind the luxury, behind the carefully curated posts, there's an alleged power play unfolding that has left even seasoned Hollywood watchers shaken. Sources claim Nicola Peltz didn't just marry Brooklyn Beckham, she slowly separated him from everything that made him him. And the most chilling part? Her billionaire father, Nicola Peltz, reportedly never believed Brooklyn was worthy of his daughter in the first place. Not talented enough, not focused enough, not strong enough. And while Brooklyn insists he's finally free, those closest to the situation say he's never been more isolated. Friends cut off, families silenced, decisions filtered, every move watched, every mistake noted. This isn't just a family feud. This is a quiet takeover, a reshaping of identity, a test of loyalty with no safety net underneath. So ask yourself this: did Brooklyn walk away on his own? Or was he pushed into a corner where walking away felt like the only option? Because once you hear what insiders claim happened behind closed doors, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. This story is far darker than anyone wants to admit. For years, the Beckham family represented something almost untouchable. Not just fame, not just money, but control, discipline, image. David Beckham wasn't simply a football legend. He was a global brand engineered with precision. Victoria Beckham wasn't just a former pop star. She transformed herself into a fashion authority through relentless structure and strategy. Together, they built a household where nothing was accidental and nothing was left unmanaged. Brooklyn Beckham was born into that machine. From the moment he could walk, cameras followed. From the moment he could speak, expectations were attached. Insiders say his childhood wasn't chaotic, but it was intense. Schedules, security, rules, a life where mistakes weren't just personal failures, they were headlines. And according to people who claim to have watched him grow up, Brooklyn learned early that love often came wrapped in pressure. By the time he reached adulthood, that pressure reportedly began to suffocate him. Photography, cooking, lifestyle branding. Brooklyn tried on identities the way other young men try on clothes, searching for something that felt like his. But every pivot was judged, mocked, compared to the empire his parents had built. Insiders claim Brooklyn felt permanently measured and permanently lacking. That's when Nicola Peltz entered the picture. She wasn't just an actress. She wasn't just beautiful. She came from a world Brooklyn had never truly experienced: old money, power, corporate dominance, and a family that didn't rely on public approval to maintain influence. Her father, Nicola Peltz, didn't build fame. He built leverage, boardrooms, takeovers, control without applause. From the start, sources allege the dynamic was different. Nicola didn't push Brooklyn to become more. She told him he already was enough. And to someone raised under constant evaluation, that kind of validation can feel intoxicating, dangerous, addictive. Friends noticed changes almost immediately. Brooklyn became quieter, more guarded. Conversations that used to be spontaneous reportedly turned rehearsed. Visits home shortened. Decisions delayed. Insiders claim Nicola encouraged boundaries, framing distance not as rejection, but as self-protection. And at first, it sounded reasonable, healthy even, but then came the wedding preparations. What should have been a joyful merger of two powerful families allegedly exposed deep fractures instead. From disputes over planning to tension around tradition, insiders say nothing flowed naturally. And when the wedding finally arrived, all eyes were watching, not just the guests, but the power dynamics. The now infamous wedding dance moment became symbolic. Brooklyn later claimed his mother crossed a line. Others present say emotions spiraled fast. Whatever the truth, one thing is consistent across accounts: the energy in the room shifted permanently. After that night, insiders say everything hardened. Communication between Brooklyn and his parents reportedly became strained, then minimal, then formal. Conversations were no longer emotional, they were strategic. And behind the scenes, something far more serious was allegedly taking shape. Sources claim Nicola made her position clear. She wasn't asking Brooklyn to choose, but she was making it impossible not to. According to people close to the situation, Brooklyn was told that peace required distance, that healing required separation, that loyalty required clarity, and Brooklyn listened. What worries observers isn't just that he pulled away from his parents, it's that he pulled away from everything else too. Childhood friends faded. Independent advisors disappeared. Even career guidance reportedly began flowing through a smaller, tighter circle, one deeply connected to the Peltz family ecosystem. Meanwhile, Nicola's world remained intact. She stayed close to her family. Her financial independence remained untouched. Her support system never fractured. Brooklyn, on the other hand, slowly exited his own, and then came the prenuptial agreement. Strict, unforgiving, according to alleged reports. Brooklyn would never access the Peltz fortune under any circumstances. If the marriage failed, he would leave with only what he personally created. No fallback, no inherited safety net, no parental empire waiting behind him. To some, that was smart. To others, it was alarming because by that point, Brooklyn had already distanced himself from the only other safety net he had ever known. David and Victoria reportedly noticed the shift long before the public did. They say conversations felt filtered, that their son sounded different, that emotional language was replaced by legal phrasing. And while Brooklyn insists he was finally finding his voice, those closest to his parents claim they barely recognized it. Hovering over all of this is Nelson Peltz. Silent, observant, unimpressed by image alone, insiders allege. Nelson never openly opposed the marriage, but never embraced Brooklyn either. To him, sources claim Brooklyn represented uncertainty, a young man without a defined lane, a last name doing more work than the person behind it. No public insults, no dramatic confrontations, just quiet judgment. And in families like the Peltzes, silence isn't passive. It's evaluative. By the time Brooklyn publicly accused his parents of control, insiders say the groundwork had already been laid. Emotional distance had become physical separation. Separation had become legal boundaries. And boundaries had become declarations of war. What looked sudden to the public was, according to sources, years in the making, and that's what makes the story so unsettling, because this wasn't an explosion. It was a slow extraction, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, Brooklyn Beckham was already standing in a completely different world, cut off from the one that raised him. And dependent on the one that now judged him, the moment everything truly collapsed didn't happen on a red carpet. It didn't happen at a family dinner. And it definitely didn't happen in front of cameras, according to alleged insider accounts. It happened quietly through a legal document that no parent ever expects to receive from their own child, a cease and desist notice. Sources claim David and Victoria Beckham were blindsided when it arrived. No warning, no emotional buildup. Just cold, formal language demanding they stop mentioning Brooklyn publicly and route all communication through legal representatives. No calls, no texts, no private family conversations, lawyers only, for a family built on image, loyalty, and tight control. This wasn't just hurtful, it was destabilizing. Insiders say Victoria was physically shaken. David reportedly reread the document multiple times, convinced there had been a mistake. This wasn't rebellion. This was erasure behind closed doors. The Beckhams allegedly asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. Who told him to do this? Because according to those close to the family, Brooklyn had never spoken in legal language before. He had never framed emotional pain as boundaries or narrative control. That vocabulary, they say, was new. And it didn't sound like him. In response, David and Victoria did something they hadn't done in years. They stopped thinking like public figures and acted like parents. They wrote him a letter, not a statement, not a rebuttal, a private, handwritten message sent directly to Brooklyn. Insiders describe it as emotional, restrained, and devastatingly simple. No accusations, No defenses, just concern, love, and one repeated line, "Please tell us you're okay." That letter, according to sources, was never answered. Instead, days later, Brooklyn went public. In a lengthy, emotionally charged social media post, he accused his parents of controlling his life, prioritizing their brand over his happiness, and disrespecting his wife. He didn't hedge. He didn't soften the blow. He didn't leave the door open. He closed it publicly, permanently. Fans were stunned. The media exploded. But behind the scenes, insiders were more disturbed by how he said it than what he said. Sources claim the tone felt rehearsed. The structure felt deliberate. The language mirrored private talking points Nicola had allegedly repeated for months, and that's when the first twist hit, according to multiple unverified but consistent accounts. Brooklyn didn't draft the statement alone. Insiders claim it was reviewed, refined, strategically timed. And while no one can prove direct involvement, those close to the situation believe the post reflected the influence of the Peltz household far more than the Beckham one. But the real shock wasn't the post. It was what surfaced next. Sources allege that inside elite circles, Nicola Peltz had already been expressing doubts about Brooklyn long before the public fallout. Not emotional doubts, strategic ones. Concerns about direction, stability, value. One alleged insider quote began circulating quietly, "He's not building anything. He's drifting." No confirmation, no denial. Just silence, and that silence spoke volumes. Because in the Peltz world, approval isn't given freely and disappointment isn't announced loudly. It's communicated through distance, through control, through conditions. And Brooklyn, according to sources, was beginning to feel that pressure. Despite cutting off his parents, his position inside the Peltz ecosystem didn't suddenly strengthen. Instead, insiders claim expectations increased. Career focus was questioned. Public perception mattered more. Emotional reactions were seen as liabilities, which brings us to the most unsettling part of this twist, according to alleged reports. Brooklyn believed cutting off his parents would finally prove his independence. That choosing Nicola publicly would silence doubts. That loyalty would earn respect, but insiders say it had the opposite effect. Within weeks of the public fallout, whispers began circulating that Nicola Peltz viewed Brooklyn's decision not as strength, but as instability. Because in elite power structures, cutting off your family doesn't signal courage. It signals unpredictability, and suddenly, Brooklyn found himself in the most dangerous position possible, estranged from the family that raised him, questioned by the family he chose, and locked into a marriage with a prenuptial agreement that left him financially exposed if anything went wrong. Friends who attempted to reach out were allegedly discouraged. Advisors were quietly replaced. Conversations began happening around him instead of with him, and yet, publicly, Brooklyn doubled down. He posted about peace, about truth, about finally being free, but those watching closely noticed something chilling. He stopped speaking about the future. No long-term projects, no independent plans, no vision beyond the present moment. His world had narrowed, and the tighter it became, the harder it would be to escape. The first twist wasn't that Brooklyn turned on his parents. The first twist was realizing that doing so didn't give him power. It may have cost him everything. And as this conflict escalated, one terrifying question began circulating among insiders: if Brooklyn has already burned the bridge behind him, what happens if the ground in front of him starts to crack? Because according to those closest to the situation, the worst was still coming. Once the door was slammed shut, the fallout didn't explode. It crept slowly, quietly, and far more dangerously than anyone expected. At first, the public saw confidence. Brooklyn posted calm captions, carefully chosen words about peace, truth, and standing firm. On the surface, it looked like clarity. But behind the scenes, insiders claim panic had already begun to ripple through elite circles, because cutting off the Beckhams didn't just change Brooklyn's personal life. It changed his value. According to alleged industry leaks, brand partners immediately grew cautious. Meetings were postponed. Conversations paused. Projects that once leaned heavily on the Beckham name suddenly felt and supported. And for the first time in his life, Brooklyn was navigating opportunity without the invisible safety net of his parents' influence. That's when the second wave hit. A private message never confirmed, never denied began circulating among high-level insiders. Not on public platforms, not on gossip sites, but in quiet group chats where reputations are assessed, not debated. The message allegedly read, "He's emotional. He reacts instead of builds. This isn't strength. It's volatility, no signature, no source." But insiders say the implication was unmistakable. Nicola Peltz had made a judgment, and that judgment wasn't kind. What shocked observers wasn't just the content, it was the timing. Because, according to those close to the situation, Brooklyn believed the public stand against his parents would solidify his place within the Peltz world. That it would prove loyalty. That it would demonstrate commitment. Instead, insiders say the move raised red flags. In elite power families, loyalty is expected, but isolation is dangerous. Walking away from one empire doesn't automatically earn respect in another, especially when that empire values discipline, results, and long-term leverage above all else. And then came the reveal that changed everything, the prenuptial agreement. While rumors of a prenup had circulated for years, insiders now claim details surfaced that were far more severe than anyone imagined. According to alleged legal leaks, Brooklyn was barred not only from accessing the Peltz fortune, but from any indirect financial safety tied to it. No fallback trusts, no shared control, no silent cushions. If the marriage ended, Brooklyn would leave with exactly what he personally earned, nothing more. At the same time, sources claim Nicola retained full access to her family's support, resources, and influence regardless of the marriage's outcome. The imbalance was undeniable, and here's where the escalation turned unsettling, because by this point, Brooklyn had already distanced himself from the Beckhams. The family that once provided emotional grounding, career backing, and public credibility was gone. According to insiders, he now existed in a narrow emotional corridor, one household, one narrative, one future, and that future was being evaluated. Friends reportedly noticed Brooklyn growing quieter, more cautious, less expressive. Decisions took longer. Confidence appeared brittle. Some claim he began seeking reassurance constantly about projects, about direction, about his place, that didn't go unnoticed. Insiders allege Nicola Peltz values decisiveness above all else. Emotional uncertainty isn't seen as vulnerability, it's seen as risk. And as Brooklyn's public image became increasingly tied to conflict rather than creation, whispers of disappointment grew louder behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Nicola's public presence only strengthened. She attended events confidently. She maintained close ties with her family. She projected stability, control, continuity. Her world hadn't fractured. Brooklyn's had. And then came the most chilling development yet. According to multiple and verified sources, conversations about Brooklyn's future began happening without him in the room. Advisors discussed next steps. Image consultants debated containment. Industry figures questioned long-term viability, all while Brooklyn continued posting about peace. Observers say the disconnect was haunting because while Brooklyn framed his choices as liberation, the machinery around him treated those same choices as a liability to be managed. And then, unexpectedly, a new voice entered the conversation. A former youth coach from Brooklyn's teenage football days stepped forward. Not to attack, not to accuse, but to reflect. He spoke about a boy raised under relentless scrutiny, about security guards at training sessions, about pressure masquerading as privilege, and about a child who learned early that approval was conditional. His words cut deep. When someone finally tells you that you're enough, you'll follow them anywhere. That single sentence reframed everything. Because suddenly, this wasn't a story about rebellion. It was a story about dependency. And that realization sparked a terrifying question among insiders. What happens if the person you've made your emotional anchor starts seeing you as a burden? Because sources now suggest Nicola Peltz's patience is thinning. Not publicly, not emotionally, but strategically. And if that's true, then Brooklyn isn't just isolated, he's exposed. As the story escalates, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. Brooklyn didn't just leave his family behind, he entered a world where love is conditional, silence is judgment, and failure isn't forgiven. It's documented. And the scariest part? No one knows how long that silence will last before it turns into something far more decisive. Once the whispers escaped private circles, the internet did what it always does best: it detonated. What began as hushed speculation turned into an all-out digital battlefield. With Brooklyn Beckham at the center and no safe place left to stand, social media split instantly. One side rallied behind Brooklyn, praising him as brave, healed, and finally free. Viral posts framed him as a man escaping a controlling upbringing, choosing love over legacy. Hashtags like #ProtectBrooklyn and #LetHimLive surged overnight, fueled by emotional threads and carefully cropped screenshots of his statements. But the other side was louder, sharper, more suspicious, comment sections filled with uneasy questions. Why did he cut off everyone except her? Why does she still have her family, but he lost his? This doesn't look like freedom. It looks like isolation. TikTok breakdowns went viral within hours. Amateur body language experts dissected Brooklyn's interviews frame by frame, pointing out forced smiles, nervous pauses, and what they called compliance posture. Reaction videos stacked millions of views, each creator racing to uncover what's really going on. Then came the alleged leaked group chats, and verified screenshots began circulating, claiming to show conversations between industry insiders discussing Brooklyn's sudden fallout. The messages weren't cruel, but they were cold. One line appeared repeatedly: "He's become unpredictable." That word "unpredictable" hit harder than any insult, because in Hollywood, unpredictability isn't edgy. It's dangerous. Brand analysts allegedly began reevaluating Brooklyn's marketability. According to rumor-heavy reports, at least T2 lifestyle partnerships quietly paused negotiations. Not canceled, paused. The kind of pause that never announces itself publicly, but speaks volumes behind closed doors. Meanwhile, mainstream media played it safe. Headlines stayed neutral. Language remained cautious. But the framing subtly shifted. Brooklyn was no longer the eldest Beckham son finding his way. He became embroiled, estranged, at the center of controversy. Those words matter inside the industry. Perception is currency. And Brooklyn's was fluctuating fast. Then something unexpected happened. A well-known celebrity stylist, someone who had worked with both Beckham adjacent brands and Peltz connected events, liked a comment questioning Brooklyn's isolation. The like was quickly removed, but screenshots were already everywhere. The comment read, "Funny how independence only goes one direction." That single click sent shockwaves. Suddenly, people weren't just speculating. They were connecting dots. Entertainment podcasts devoted entire episodes to the situation. Panel discussions erupted. Was Brooklyn a victim of emotional manipulation or a man finally setting boundaries? Was Nicola protecting her marriage or consolidating control? Even celebrities began weighing in carefully. One A-list actress cryptically tweeted, "Power doesn't raise its voice, it rearranges the room." Another posted, "Isolation is the quietest form of control." No names mentioned. No accusations made, but the message landed. And then came the most damaging reaction of all: the silence from Nicola Peltz. No denial, no clarification, no supportive statement about his son. In law. In elite circles, silence isn't neutrality, it's assessment. Insiders claim that within boardrooms and private gatherings, the narrative hardened. Brooklyn was discussed less as an individual and more as a variable, a risk factor, someone emotionally reactive, professionally unfocused, and increasingly controversial. And that's when the Beckham contrast became impossible to ignore. While Brooklyn's world shrank, the rest of the Beckham family carried on. Public events, career milestones, supportive posts between siblings, No public mudslinging. No retaliation, just continuity. Observers couldn't stop asking the same question if the Beckham household was truly as controlling as Brooklyn claims. Why did only one child walk away? That question fueled even more division. Some argued Brooklyn was the only one brave enough to leave. Others argued he was the only one vulnerable enough to be pulled away. And then, in a move that stunned even seasoned commentators, a former youth coach from Brooklyn's football days spoke publicly. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't choose sides, but his words cut deeper than any headline. He described a teenage Brooklyn surrounded by constant security, pressure, and scrutiny. A boy who struggled with anxiety. A boy who wanted approval more than anything else. And a boy who, when offered certainty, clung to it. The reaction was explosive. Suddenly, sympathy flooded back, but it was different now. Darker, more concerned. Less celebratory, because this wasn't a story about defiance anymore. It was a story about fragility. Industry insiders began whispering a chilling thought: if Brooklyn's emotional anchor ever shifts, he has nowhere else to go. And that realization sparked the most uncomfortable debate yet. Is Nicola protecting him from harm or positioning herself as the only person he can't afford to lose? No one agrees, but everyone is watching, because the louder the public reaction becomes, the quieter the real decisions are being made behind closed doors. And according to those closest to the industry, those decisions may already be in motion. The question now isn't whether Brooklyn has support. It's whether that support comes with conditions. And if it does, how long before those conditions change? Just when it seemed like the story had reached its darkest point, insiders claim something far more unsettling began to surface, something that reframed everything Brooklyn Beckham thought he had secured. According to late-stage whispers inside elite circles, the real power shift hadn't happened when Brooklyn cut off his parents. It happened after. Because once the drama settled, once the noise died down, Nicola Peltz reportedly began reassessing the situation with brutal clarity, not emotionally. Strategically. Sources allege that private conversations inside the Peltz orbit took a colder tone. Brooklyn's stalled projects, his public controversies, his increasing reliance on emotional reassurance, none of it aligned with how power families operate. In that world, loyalty is expected, but self-sufficiency is mandatory. And then came the twist no one saw coming. Insiders claim that Nicola Peltz never wanted Brooklyn to prove himself by cutting off the Beckhams. In fact, according to those familiar with his thinking, that move backfired. Because to someone like Nelson, burning bridges doesn't show commitment, it shows instability. One alleged insider put it chillingly: if he can walk away from his parents this easily, what does that say about him long-term? That question reportedly changed everything. Suddenly, Brooklyn wasn't being evaluated as a son-in-law. He was being evaluated as a risk. And in families built on control and legacy, risks are contained or removed. Meanwhile, Nicola remained outwardly calm, present, supportive, unwavering, but observers began noticing something strange. Brooklyn appeared more cautious around her, less spontaneous, almost careful, as if every word carried weight, as if every reaction mattered. And that's when the most disturbing possibility emerged, according to multiple and verified sources. Brooklyn may now realize he overplayed his hand. He cut off his parents, believing it would cement his independence, believing it would earn him respect, believing it would give him leverage. Instead, insiders say it stripped him of all leverage. Because now, if things ever shifted, if approval cooled, if patience thinned, Brooklyn would have nowhere to retreat, no family safety net, no empire to fall back on, no public goodwill strong enough to override elite judgment. David and Victoria, sources insist, would still take him back instantly. No conditions, no public apology, just love. But here's the cliffhanger that has everyone uneasy: would Brooklyn be allowed to go back? That's the question insiders won't answer, because if the Peltz family views reconciliation with the Beckhams as weakness, then even wanting to reconnect could come at a cost. And if Brooklyn hesitates, if he starts questioning the path he chose, that hesitation itself could be seen as disloyalty. And loyalty, in this world, isn't emotional. It's enforced. The most haunting detail of all? Nelson Peltz still hasn't said a word publicly. No defense of Brooklyn, no reassurance, no denial of the rumors. Just silence. And, in the language of power, silence isn't absence. It's judgment waiting to be delivered. So now the story hangs in a terrifying balance. Is Brooklyn still choosing this life, or is he simply trapped inside it? Is Nicola his protector or the last gatekeeper between him and everything he's lost? And if Brooklyn ever decides he wants out, will anyone let him leave? Because according to those watching this most closely, the next move won't be loud. It won't be public. And when it happens, it may finally reveal whether Brooklyn Beckham walked into this future willingly, or whether the door quietly closed behind him the moment he chose to step inside.